Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no
Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, David Roberts, along with the OG Dr. Neil Holmes and the oral historian, Andre Taylor. Today, we have a special guest with us, a seasoned educator in the state of Ohio, personal friend of mine, classmate that goes back to middle school. Welcome, Miss Robin McWilliams Cleveland. Robin,
Good
how are you
evening.
doing?
Good evening. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to Hi, Full Circle. Hello, Dr. Neil. Hello, Andre. Great to meet you all.
Hey, well, thanks for joining us. I reached out to you a couple of weeks ago because I'm always perusing things, topics for the show. And I came across Ohio House Bill 322 and a sub House Bill 327 and asked you if you had any, strong opinions on it. To sum it up, and you could probably talk about it a little bit better than I can, but just to sum it up for our audience, it's a bill being introduced in Ohio by Republicans, which is no surprise, where they want to limit or possibly eliminate the discussions of race in history, which since this country was founded on racial divisions, I don't see how that's even possible, but they feel like teaching about race in history is divisive. So they want to eliminate that. So just to get us rolling, Robin, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have no thought on it because I find it weak. I find it insulting as an educator, and especially as an educator of all Black male school where I am right now. I find it absolutely ridiculous. I don't know where these people live. I don't know what these people do, but that's not what a true educator is about. In education, I know at Central State, we learn to tell the whole story, whether it's pretty or not. We learn that, your pedagogy is your pedagogy, and you do whatever you need to do to make sure that your students are progressing and moving, and they adapt that skill in order to take it to the next level where they are encouraged to do their own research and do their own find out their own depth and meaning to the story. At my own personal thing, I'm not one of those textbook teachers. I never have been, never will. My heart, my mouth will not allow me to conform. I've never been a conventional educator. I never had. Maybe that's what makes me so popular and why people, tend to gravitate to me. I do my best to try to keep it real at all times. There's no way that you can teach any story without telling the whole story. Most of the information is never found in the textbook anyway. Information that needs to be conveyed to my people is often from secondhand stories, grandfathers. It's passed down from uncles and their experience, firsthand accounts, stories around the kitchen table at the holiday, things of that nature. So those stories are from like the ancestral type conditioning, and that's why I learned a lot of things. I still keep in touch with Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson is a relative of my husband's. And so he had, Mr. Johnson taught us from the textbook, but he also taught us different ways and means and different stories. If you go in his basement, he has so many artifacts and so many things from Africa and Senegal and Ghana and all of the places that he has visited, and he has a true collection in his basement, and not just artwork, not just sculptures and crafts. He has also books and things of that nature in his basement. So it's a beautiful thing. I'm going to reach out to him and I'm going to ask him to get in touch with you, see if you'd be interested in having a conversation with him.
Oh,
because
definitely.
He is, of course, I didn't do well in history, but now I appreciate his effort and his teachings and those type of things that you're always in touch by teachers that touch you most. So you always try to mimic and mock those teachers. And our teachers never taught from a book.
And just for people
not the good ones.
Right, not the great ones. And just for people listening that of course wouldn't know, Mr. Johnson was a world history teacher in our school district, Warrensville Heights. So we both had him in 10th grade. And it's interesting, I think about him when I'm dealing with kids today in school, you know, they always get you with that. How is this going to help me in life? You know how a kid hit you with that when they get a little lazy. I did it too. And I'm sure all of us probably did it said that at one point in high school. And I remember him teaching us about Charles Darwin and basically the survival of the fittest. And that has kind of shaped my mindset moving forward. Whereas when I listen to other people and their opinions, and even when I disagree with them passionately, I'm able to remember what he taught me about Charles Darwin. And I understand that some of these people are just looking out for their own best interests, sometimes to the detriment of others, but I can understand it to some degree. Now, Robert, I'm going to come back to you, but since this is one of those topics, it's education, and everybody here is in education in some degree. OG, Dr. Neil Holmes, why don't we start with you? And I know you never taught from the book. From a book. Ray knows that, but I'm pretty sure I know your opinion. But just for the record, why don't you give us your thoughts on this proposed House bill?
Well, actually, I always taught from several books.
But you chose them, though.
Yeah. You know, not necessarily a textbook, but always several books. But I want to look at the political background behind this. Steve Bannon, who was the guy who actually developed the strategy to get Donald Trump in the office, and who was one of the leaders of what they call the alt-right movement. That is the right-wing movement that that tries to appeal to a broader audience. He has said that this movement against what they call critical race theory is actually going to bring about, they're going to be able to win, that is, the Republicans are going to be able to win 50 seats in Congress. And that issue is going to help them win back the House as well as win back the Senate. So this is what in political science we call a wedge issue. And a wedge issue is an issue that's used to drive a division and split off voters, one group of voters, so that they'll come into your, your area. And so what they're looking at is the Democrats have done quite well over the last couple of elections in the suburbs as well as in the inner cities. And so this question of education, which is always a critical question in the suburbs, and not only among whites, but also among, there's some Asian issues here as well. When you look at Northern Virginia and the attempt to get more Blacks and Latinx people into the AP courses, advanced placement courses, that's also sort of an issue. So this becomes a kind of an issue that is developed in order to bring people who might vote Democrat over into the Republican side. And Virginia has become, in many ways, has moved from a purple state into a blue state, a kind of a Democratic state. And so this is a critical issue around the country in terms of that. So that's the political, in terms of political game. In terms of actual misrepresentation of issues, and Kwame Ture used to always say, the power to define is the power to control. The power to take an issue and define a term on your terms and have people accept it is the power to control, because you're controlling the debate and you're controlling the contours of the discussion. Critical race theory is something that is taught largely in law schools and mostly in grad school. So you're not going to see critical race theory even taught in high school, elementary, in public schools. You might have aspects, you might have some things that have been learned there and kind of passed down, but critical race theory is not taught there. And it is not something that some of these people would have you think is something that is developed to make whites feel bad about being white. In fact, the reason that it's called critical race theory is because it suggests that there's something more than race at issue in determining inequality and other things. And in particular, as legal scholars, they're looking at the role of the state institutions, the courts, and that sort of thing. Now, where I suspect that where Donald Trump picked this term up because he raised it a year or so ago, I think he picked it up uh, from a group that's called the Federalist Society, a very conservative group of lawyers, judges, law students. And in the law school, in terms of the battle for ideas, one of their most critical or effective opposition is in the critical race theory. So if you can begin to combat that in law school, you have it won. But to bring this out into the public schools is actually to try to control a debate around something that really doesn't exist. And but it has developed a very hot button. It's a hot button issue. It's brought a lot of people out, and for instance, in Northern Virginia, a lot of people who used to have small, boring school board meetings, and now you have them packed to the roof. And so this is an issue that's really one that has to be taken on in a lot of ways.
Now, Dre, let me come to you as the oral historian. And again, for those listening and watching, since us three are in Virginia, and of course, Richmond, Virginia was the Confederate capital. Dre, you are in William and Mary College, and you talked to me about the fact that there's been discussion about a lot of the Confederate symbols around Williamsburg coming down. There's been some in Richmond coming down. And so I look at the Republican websites because I like to, hear all sides and see what they're talking about. And what they seem to feel is like this is woke culture, and they're always talking about, oh, here we go with the woke culture again. So that's when I first saw this House Bill 322, that's what I thought this was. I thought this was kind of like a backlash to that. I didn't even think of everything that Dr. Holmes just talked about, but again, that's why he's the OG, right? But were you thinking like I was thinking, like that it was just kind of an attack on the woke culture?
No, what I saw it was what I saw it as was just an attack on humanity. The one thing that you don't want to do is give people the truth. Giving people the truth empowers them. It empowers them to make change. It empowers them to seek out answers for other things. And I think that by knowing certain aspects of history and being able to question those who have dictated and interpret history prior to now makes you raise questions about their ethics, their methodology, and their research. So what I see now, especially over at William and Mary, a lot of the students will ask you questions about what does this mean in race? Why are people angry about this? Why are people angry about that? And you start to explain these items too, and you get this question: well, how do you know all of that? Well, the obvious reason, I'm Black, and I started researching things that impacted me, and now I understand how people are fearful of critical race theory, not the fact that it exists, but the fact that there's a lot of truth. William and Mary, right now, they're building a memorial to the formerly enslaved people that were there. They have as many names as they could possibly have, but I think it's 107 others that they don't have names for. So you see this moment of reckoning going on in the country where people are exposing areas of history that have not been openly explored. And it's empowering people. People are like, well, now that I know this and I'm equipped with this knowledge, this is how I'm going to use it going forward. Some people, primarily, the Republicans in Congress and Senate, look at this as, oh boy, here it comes. The gig's up. It's time for us to move on. But the empowered people, it is not just woke people. It's people who now realize there's this new group of people that are like, wow, we didn't know. Then there's the other group who are like Dr. Holmes was like, I've been telling you this for a number of years. It's not new to me.
Exactly.
So I think now it's the crossroad is, how do we save our tails by diminishing things? And you look at situations like with Nicole Hannah-Jones with UNC Chapel Hill. So she wrote something about 1619. That's fine. And I tell everybody as well, that's the first time that people said, that's up for debate. So do we look at conquistadors in the 1500s coming to Florida who had Black people with them? So it's every state has their version of 1619. South Carolina has 1650. North Carolina has 1645. So you have all these different numbers that are coming out. And I think what really was the fearful thing is, well, they know about 1619. They're going to learn about all these other dates. Here, how are we going to cover this up? And it's not, I don't think that it should be covered up. I think that it should be put out there for people to interpret, because for so long, people never had a lot of this information. You have it now, so you have to use it for what's best for you, and that's interpreting how this country really is.
And Robin, I want to come back to you on that, because Dre makes a good point. Well, it makes several great points. But I know when we were in school, I don't recall much discussion about slavery. Not that that's the only thing that we have in our history, but I don't recall anything about a whole lot about before we even came to America. There was a little bit about the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, so on and so forth. I don't remember Malcolm X ever being mentioned.
Me either.
But has that changed in over 30 years that we were in school? Is it any different now, do you see?
I would hope that it would be, but again, that's on a personalized view. That depends on the individual. We always did February, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King. By being from Cleveland, Garrett Morgan, we always did those, those people who everybody knew. But it was definitely a challenge when we were faced with not them, find somebody else. Right. Not them, find somebody else. I had a professor. It's a ton of people out here that you can learn about. Some people that are walking around this campus right now, find out who it is. So that's when you go to your uncles, your fathers, your grandfathers, and all those people who have firsthand accounts, where you can find that type of rich history that's not necessarily in the textbook, but is definitely noteworthy and worth learning about.
And since we first started talking about this House Bill 322 and Sub House Bill 327, do we know the status of these bills now? I don't think they've passed.
I don't believe that it will have any legs yet. But of course, there are those individuals who are determined to be right, regardless of what we already know is different. So they have the power and the money and the campaign and this propaganda to do whatever they need to do. So I feel like as an educator, especially in Cleveland with a different, demographic than some of those who are making these bills, they, it depends on whether it gets weight, and it's our job to fight it, to make sure that we make sure that the story is told right, whether it's shown in a bad light or a good light. There are stories where people have done really great things, but they are horrible people. But they've done great things for the culture, for the people, for the community, but they do terrible things behind doors. And some of those doors have been opened. Like my grandmama said, whatever you do in the dark will come to light eventually, but that doesn't taint what you've done for people. I don't know.
Exactly. And another thing I thought about when I first read these two bills, or the perspective on these bills, there was a movie I was watching years ago. It was about the A. Philip Randolph, and when he was looking to start the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, right? And so the white men that were in charge of the railroad system, those sleeping cars, they were, somebody suggested, well, why don't we just fire all of them and just hire somebody, hire white men to do this, and the one guy was like, well, bowing and scraping is not my style, and then another person suggested, well, let's get some Asians to do it. They can bow and scrape with the rest of them, with the best of them. And it just made me think that a lot of things that are put out are taught to have us keep conforming, and serve a specific purpose. And so they don't want to get rid of us. They want us to, keep serving that purpose.
Because they
And I
need
thought-
you.
Right. And I thought this was, a perfect example about it. Dre, I see you smiling. What's your take on that?
No, go ahead. I'll let you continue. This is
It's like, even to the point when I look at how every day we still have to do the Pledge of Allegiance, in the schools. I'm still in the public school, so we still doing the Pledge of Allegiance. It's still taught that it's a great thing to go off and fight and possibly even die in war. Now if you're 35 or 40 and you'd say, I want to go off and fight and get killed for whatever reason, that's fine. You're old enough to make that decision. But if you're 18 and that's been kind of drummed into you since you were 5 years old, and then you go off at 18, get your legs shot off, and then maybe 10 years later, like Ron Kovic, the Vietnam veteran who came back and said, this was some nonsense, So all of that just kind of ties into the fact that we have, I love education, but it's not perfect. It's an agenda behind it. And it's here to kind of make us conform and give us specific ideas. And whenever that's challenged, there's some people that get their feathers ruffled.
Well, it's uncomfortable. So when certain parties are uncomfortable, they'll do anything to change the narrative to make it so that they shine in a different light. So of course, if your truth is uncomfortable for you, then of course you're not going to try to promote and excel that. You're not going to do that.
Another thing that I noticed as well, and Dave, you bring up some good points that I've argued with people about lately. The difference between patriotism and nationalism. The two are not synonymous. Patriotism is me paying my taxes, me voting, and me uplifting my community and country. Nationalism is I pledge of allegiance to the flag because it's a symbol that we're pledging an allegiance to. I see people, just recently the 4th of July, how many people have had shirts that look like American flags? And it's, I respect the flag. Well, respecting the flag is understanding the history behind the flag and knowing that what you're doing is not actually respecting the flag. And this part of Virginia that I'm in, I've seen several American flags affixed to the back of these big pickup trucks with big wheels and big exhaust systems, and guys with bent brim hats in it that don't look like me. And the flags are tattered, and it's just like, I stand for the flag. Exactly. And it's these things that are being taught in the school systems that bother me. And as a product of the public school system where I remember when we got our first Black principal in 4th grade, and that was the last time I stood for a flag salute because she said, we're not going to do that here. And it wasn't that she wasn't proud to be from this country. It was that was teaching a method of nationalism. Nationalism is what gets a lot of Americans in trouble when they go overseas, because you have this identity that I'm an American, I have this flag, we have these songs of proud to be an American. However, you don't realize you're in international territory. That does not matter anymore. Your stars and stripes and bars do not extend to this country. And I think that educating young people to believe that supporting the flag is supporting the country is asinine, and I think that they're teaching the wrong methods. You have to do that separation of nationalism and patriotism.
And it's funny when you say that. Jesse Ventura, of all people, he was very supportive of Colin Kaepernick, and so he was talking about. He said when people got upset when Colin Kaepernick knelt, am I saying that correctly? We're all educators, knelt or kneeled. He was saying, well, you don't mandate patriotism. You earn that through what you do. Just like me as a father, I can't, have my 2 kids and go off and do nothing for them and say, hey, you're supposed to love and respect me because I'm your dad. Right. No, I have to kind of earn that by actually taking care of them, and doing something for them. So, when that House bill, when I saw that, that's what, that all tied into it for me, like you just kind of like being programmed.
But there's,
Dr. Holmes, what do you think?
yeah, well, there's a difference between nationalism and chauvinism.
Mhm.
Nationalism means sort of respect for whatever you consider to be your nation. Chauvinism is the idea that somehow your nation is better than everyone else and has the ability and has the it should be able to dominate everyone else. But I want to go back to this question of the school education in schools, and I want to look at the smaller issue in terms of Ohio than the bigger issue. One of the things that we're seeing in Ohio now is the question in turn within the Republican Party between those people. You have a couple of folks who voted to impeach, Republicans voted to impeach, and also voted to look at what happened in January the 6th. And they're coming under attack by Trump Republicans. And basically the Republican Party today is pretty much Trump Republicans. 56% of Republicans today believe that Trump actually, the election was stolen from him, and another 19% are not sure. They might lean one way or the other. So a good, you know, a pretty good majority of the Republican Party believes that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him, and so that's part of the thing. Now that's so it's interesting that when Trump came to Ohio recently, the governor who represents sort of the old school Republican Party wasn't there, and Portman, who's resigning, Senator Portman, who's resigning, wasn't there, and I think Gonzalez, who's coming under attack, wasn't there either, and he's up in I think up in Lorraine in that area.
Medina, Lorraine, up there somewhere.
Yeah, up sort
Elyria, something like that.
Yeah, Elyria maybe, Lorraine, in that section. So you know, so that's part of the internal kind of thing. So you want an issue that's designed to bring, if you don't support this issue, you're really not supporting Republicans, as well as you're really supporting this issue, really not supporting white folks. And now for the bigger issue in terms of one group, you know, this chauvinist group trying to oppress other groups, is that you have a attempt of what they call race peace. That is, you can oppress people, and as long, you know, people who oppress us want us not only to be oppressed, but they also want us to smile and love them at the same time they're oppressing them. So race peace is when you oppress people and no one even challenges, even theoretically, the basis for that oppression. And so when people begin to challenge that, both in terms of words, theories, ideas, but also in the street, then they begin to go into motion. And what's interesting is what whites are doing here is who are majority in the country, are doing all the things that they criticized African people for doing. So, for instance, they say that whenever we raise some issues, they say we are taking this victim approach, and they're taking the victim's approach. You know, people are saying bad things about us because we're white. They say that you know, there's a certain kind of council culture that won't let ideas be heard, and here you have ideas being, you know, freely stated, and instead of debating these ideas as ideas versus idea, they want to shut down debate, which is tantamount to book burning. So when you shut down debate and shut down ideas, you're also a book burner, and we know where that always leads. So you know, this question of this is a huge question. It's also, you know, the norm. I mean, I should say the norm, but this is part of the process. You know, in political science, there's one brother who has a theory called dominant subordinate theory, and basically what he says is that if you have a dominant group and have a subordinate group, when the subordinate groups begin to successfully challenge the dominant group and maybe begins to make some change in the subordinate group, the dominant group has to come with a new game.
Mm-hmm.
And what this new game plan that these folks have developed is really relying a lot upon what we developed, what we did. They're borrowing from our playbook. They've read our playbook quite well. They've read it. We've forgotten more stuff from our playbook, and they're picking that stuff up and using it fairly effectively.
You know, and it's funny. I thought that when I first saw that bill, you know, I was just like, the only thing I was thinking was, and we've all touched on it, backlash, you know, backlash to Juneteenth, backlash to Trump not winning the election, you know, backlash to he may get, you know, he may end up being prosecuted. Even when Bill Cosby was released, I was thinking, okay, there's probably going to be some more things, you know, that are going to happen as a result of that, because I'm sure that there were people, whether you think he's guilty or not, I don't know. Of course, I wasn't there, but I just knew that this was an icon from our community who was, you know, completely neutralized. So when he was released, I was thinking, okay, maybe there's going to be some more, you know, backlash to this, you know, and we saw some with Felicia Rashad's comments, and then how Howard University, you know, kind of wanted her to walk that back. You know, so I guess, Robin, I would probably come to you and say, obviously you hope that this bill does not pass, but what do you hope to see happen with education in Ohio moving forward?
Well, that's I just hope that if the bill does pass, that there are going to be rebel teachers like myself who's still going to teach what they want to teach. My question is, how are you going to monitor that? I mean, where's the test for that? How are you going to monitor that? Who's going to come in daily to see what I'm teaching as that happens? You know, my administrators are loaded. And like I had a lady that once tell me, you know, shit runs downhill. So, you know, whatever happens at the top, the people that work towards that are not people that are really in the trenches. They don't have time for that. We have kids who are on the verge of suicide, who are not handling pandemic well, who are not handling coming out from pandemic well. Because at my school, they wear suit and ties daily. You know, we wear suits every day. They've been in joggers and sweatpants and tennis shoes every day. Nobody's had on a hard bottom shoe in almost 18, 19 months. Nobody's been dressed and had a haircut in 18, 19 months. Some of the kids that I haven't seen since 20. They've grown 3 inches, gained 40 pounds, these guys are different. They don't look the same. So, and I can only imagine how they feel. A lot of these kids have lost people, have social emotional learning part is going to be so big, and I don't think they're ready for that. I believe that, you know, education is definitely a business. My husband says it all the time. Education is a business. So I just hope that we don't lose the purpose and the whole reason and my calling to this education thing in the first place. I became an educator because I felt like I wasn't taught enough. Yeah, I was smart. Yeah, I did okay, but I wasn't taught what I needed to. I always tell somebody, like, nobody ever told me, just shut up, listen. You just shh, be quiet. You know, sometimes the best response is no response. I never, like, those are the things that I learned later here at the great Central State University. You know, I never learned that in high school. And I feel like with these speeding times and this microwave age and how kids want things right here, right now, and there is no process, you know, it's right now. Push a button and it happens. Click a button and it happens. So I just hope that if it does, I don't care if it does or if it doesn't pass, people like me are going to do what we need to do for our kids anyway.
I think that's
hook or crook.
I think that's the best response, that whether it passes or not, you're going to have educators like yourself that really won't care about it. You know,
sorry, not sorry.
Right. Great response. Can we close out with a kind of a curveball? Can I throw a curveball? I know nobody was prepared for this. And everybody get nervous. I brought up the Bill Cosby thing, and since that's so timely, and again, I know that wasn't the topic, but we always, with this show, we kind of go from one topic to the next. I just wanted to get everybody's opinion on his release. Dre, why don't we start with you?
Well, I was told on social media that I wasn't black anymore because I said I didn't really care. One thing I was always taught is watch the company you keep. The company you keep will either uplift you or bring you down. Like you, I was not there when the situations happened. I'm not going to take anything away from the women who said that they were attacked. What I will say is this: when you put yourself in a situation with folk that may not have your best interests, things are usually going to happen. Him getting out of prison did nothing for me, but it stole the shine from Nicole Hannah Jones. Because that same day, North Carolina said, UNC said, we're going to give you tenure. And I thought that was a much bigger story. Bill Cosby, I watched him growing up, on the Cosby Show. I didn't have much other interaction. Cosby Show and Fat Albert. That was my version of Bill Cosby. This old, feeble man now. I mean, I don't know anything about him. And I felt like it once again did what America does with this press. It put the actions of a man before the triumphs of a woman, and I had a big problem with that.
And by the way, she declined their offer and accepted a position with Howard, correct?
As she
I just
should've.
read it. I just read it. Rightfully
As
so.
she should have.
Good for
and
her.
I'm glad she did. And one thing I want to touch on, Dre, when you mentioned Fat Albert and the Cosby Show, I was also kind of that opinion. I enjoyed his contributions to entertainment, but I never thought that the real Bill Cosby was necessarily Heathcliff Huxtable.
Right.
I looked at that was a character. So when he got in trouble, I wasn't really shocked. It wasn't like I was expecting it, but I wasn't super shocked anyway, because I always try to separate the public image from who the person could be.
Yep.
So, Dr. Holmes, what are your thoughts?
Well, before I talk about Bill Cosby, just a couple of things more on the education piece.
Okay.
One thing, when we look at history standards for the public schools, they're kind of developed largely by the American Historical Association.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And when you look at the kinds of tests, questions, and the areas that you're supposed to know and have mastery of when you take your praxis and that sort of thing, we take those educational tests. Those are the kinds of issues that are going to be dealt with in the classroom. And what has happened is that over the past 40, 50 years, there's been we've changed the way we've looked at some of this stuff. So for instance, I was lucky because I went to what were called segregated schools. And in Virginia, we had 2 history books in elementary school. We had a 4th grade history book and a 7th grade history book. And we had a 5th grade world history, world geography book. And those history books told us such things as that slavery was good for us because it made us Christians. The same thing that Senator Cotton down in Arkansas is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that we like to dance, and it wasn't that bad a thing, slavery that is.
You're right.
And it also glamorized the young men from VMI, Virginia Military Institute, who fought this battle in Haymarket, and who I guess acquitted themselves quite well on the Confederate side, and it glamorized their role and all of that. And so what we're hearing in this state around some of these issues, and what you're hearing around the country, is the old history, and people who cling to the old history are challenging the way the history is being taught today, the more accurate and balanced history. And the good thing about being in school where all your teachers are black. I didn't have a white teacher in high school till the 12th grade. They began the integration process. And we had two white teachers. One was pretty good, one was pretty awful. And but you know, they told us, hey, forget about this, is nonsense. And this is what happened. And we had people like Carter G. Woodson, who was from Virginia, from a rural county in Virginia. And we learned a different way of looking at not only the United States, not only Virginia, but also the world. And that form was the form that ultimately began to win in much of academia, especially as we began to, because when we went to the university, as that first generation, a large number of students who began to go into integrated universities, we began to take our perspective into those classrooms and fought for things like Black studies, which began this kind of process. I mean, some of it was already occurring. And but much of the history, historians interpret reality. They don't just document what happens piece by piece. And so and historians are driven by current events to look at certain things maybe that happened in the past. So the events of the 60s, the civil rights, Black power events, drove historians, many of whom were white, to re-examine the historical record. And that's the sort of thing that we see and that we are seeing. And so I think that in terms of this piece here that we are looking at, it's going to be, again, it's something that where the Black school and the Black experience, Black scholarship, and enlightened white scholarship, and enlightened Asian scholarship, you know, all this other stuff, enlightened scholarship period, is coming into the classroom, but also coming into the you know, you have Dre, who's the oral historian and who's also a public intellectual, right? Not simply someone who speaks to students on that campus and other academics, but also who speaks out into the world. And as we see these public folks, public intellectuals beginning to engage, and then there's this question. But instead of engaging directly, these folks want to engage through the state. They want to enforce a particular position as opposed to studying and discussing a position and struggling around and having debate. And some of them call themselves libertarians. Mm-hmm. And the key libertarian is a guy by the, who says, ideas, you have, all ideas have some negative and some positive, and the way you get the higher ideas to have them clash in the marketplace of ideas. You don't step on them and hide them. So this is where we are in terms of that. In terms of Cosby, I really hadn't followed that case that much. I say two things though. It's dangerous when you're in a situation where a prosecutor can promise you something, promise you no further prosecution in exchange for your giving some information that you're not required to give, and then turning around and breaking that promise. And it's almost a form of double jeopardy. Mm-hmm. in this process. So that's one thing that's important here. Those things are kind of important. And it's another thing to bring into evidence people who are not really a part of the particular case. That's all, all there. You bring into evidence people for whom the statute of limitations is up, and they're not, for instance, when Chauvin was doing his trial, prosecution wanted to bring in some stuff about his previous behavior and how many times he had been complaints and etc. And they refused. They couldn't. The judge wouldn't allow that in because it was not considered to be part of that particular case. So those are things that are important, that protects certain rights. So so I think that's sort of my stance on the case itself, on the case as the case. I'm not that much into icons and things like that. And I remember the pound cake speech. So that's something for another day. But I think really we have to look at these sorts of situations. We also have to look at the culture of the period, the period of what was called the sexual revolution, where a lot of people were doing quaaludes and having sex and smoking or whatever you do. Even the old movie said, what did it say? Cocaine is fine. Some of the liquor is quicker. Somebody liquor is quicker. That means that was back in the day in the old 20s and 30s movies. 40s. So and you look at the culture of the campus with the fraternities and the parties and stuff like this is rooted in much of the male culture, white and black, of the United States. It's not individuals here and there, and it's rooted also in the culture of the I would assume in the culture of the Playboy Club, where I guess a lot of these people met each other. And there's a book out now by one of Hefner's last. I think he might have married this woman. I don't know. But she was
married all of them.
Huh?
Married all of them.
Yeah, he did marry a few.
Yeah, he had about 2 or 3 in that end. And and the sorts of things that were done, and so, but he's still considered to be an icon in certain circumstances. So we have the, again, if we kind of go away from race now to gender, and you have this thing, what's considered to be, I guess, good for a man in terms of being dashing and a conqueror, of women and sexual that kind of thing, and that's supposed to be a good thing. Then and how do women play into that in a situation in terms of, if they want to express their sexuality, how does that, so we're in a society still working that out in terms of how do you move from the old thing to something new, and along the way it's pretty negative and bumpy, but how do you move into a healthy social relations, including sexual relations between different people, between male, female, male, female, all the whole realm.
I mean, that's so true, because when you talk about the male culture, because just a couple of weeks ago I was watching that 2-part documentary on Mike Tyson, and in the second part was the part where he had the rape trial, and there were women out there protesting, saying Mike was railroaded. And one woman was shouting at the top of her lungs, "Well, what was she doing going to his hotel room at 2 a.m? And I thought to myself, she might have gone over there at 2 a.m, and she may have had the idea she was going to have sex, but then she may have changed her mind. So if she, maybe he could, and I wasn't there, of course. I'm not saying that he did it or didn't do it, but maybe he said something crude, and she was like, "Oh, forget this, I'm not doing this." So what time she went over there, to me, was irrelevant. But you had women shouting at the top of their lungs, because they've bought into that, like you touched on earlier, Dale. people define their sense of reality and have others accept it as their own. So kind of men have defined that sense of reality, and even other women are, coming to his defense because she came over there at a certain time.
Well,
So,
I think too, women, I think too, there's a certain idea that, there, there's a certain generational piece that says that you can resist men and say no. You can smack them upside the head. You can slap them. You can, you can, and that there's a certain that there are certain boundaries that you have to draw if you don't want to be victimized. And so when you have that generational reality, that generational understanding, running up against another generation of understanding that had, that kind of developed during the sexual revolution that began, I guess, the 60s and 70s and 80s and so forth. And then you have a kind of messy period in between where you kind of have to kind of figure how all that stuff is going to work out. You have to come up with a new set of rules that everybody understands. But, it's, and people looked at Mike, and they looked at Mike as the kid down the street who's getting railroaded by this,
right.
by someone who's, they say, hey, maybe that's a gold digger coming here,
Right.
and that sort of thing. So it runs both ways. You see, it runs both ways, and we have to be careful because there's
this could be a whole nother show.
Yeah, some stuff happening on both sides.
A whole nother show.
But so we have to work our way through this stuff and figure out what should be the rules.
Right. And
what are going to be the rules if we want to have a society in which women and men are equal and just about socially equal, then what's going to be the rules in terms of this whole thing? I remember down at what's the school? Not Oberlin, school down in Yellow Springs. What's the name of that school? Yellow Springs, Ohio.
Oh God.
Antioch.
Antioch.
Antioch used to have Antioch had you had to write certain things. You had to write things down and get them approved. So if you wanted to go out, if you're a man, you want to go out with a woman, you have to say, hey, I want to go out with you. I want you to write them down. I want to kiss you on a date. Right. Whatever you wanted to do, it was almost like a contractual thing. And so it was a sort of understanding on that campus that every level of the interaction had to be not only mutually approved, but also you had to be in a way that you corroborate, that this actually happened, that each party actually consented. When somebody said it was consensual, the other person said, oh no, it wasn't. Here they're saying that you actually had to have a consent form signed to move forward in each step.
Gotcha. So I know we've gone into this deep. So Robin, as our guest, I want to give you the last word. Now, I know you didn't come on here to talk about this, but
I did not.
if you just want to say no comment, I'll say thanks for coming on and we can end it. But if you have something.
Oh, I got a comment.
Okay.
But, and I've already said that comment when I said that there are people who have done wonderful things in their philanthropic ways. I was definitely referring to Bill Cosby. Okay. Bill Cosby had a whole donated all kind of money to Central State. Firsthand, visited all the time. Him and the late great Joshua Colbreth, who was our track coach, they were buddies. They hung out. He came to Central, so he did a lot for Central State University. However, it does not excuse or whatever he has done. But I mean, once again, I'm gonna rely on my ancestors and rely on my old folk. Don't go in the basement, Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim down there. Don't do that. There was always that understood, that not said thing, like, you don't go anywhere with him. Don't accept candy from anybody. Don't take this from a stranger, this and the other. So that's a whole nother show. But let's call this show "You Can't Take the Money" and you can't play victim and take the money. When the money ran out, it became a problem. I don't understand.
Right.
I'm gonna end it at that.
All right. Well,
Thank you for having me.
we want to thank you for coming on.
Invite me again.
Right. We will, because we got to talk about some other topics.
Woo!
So
That's a good one.
yeah,
That's
thanks
a
for
good one.
joining us. You know, on behalf-
Anytime. It was beautiful. I loved it. Thank you so much. The wealth of
Having
knowledge in this
myself-
room is amazing.
What's that?
The wealth of knowledge in this room is amazing.
You know, we got the OG. I get that all the time. Like
I
every
love
time
it.
I talk to
love
people
it.
about it, they say, "Man, that Dr. Holmes, he breaking it down." We don't care
I
what
love
you
it.
say.
I love it.
Well, hey, we loved having you. Thanks for joining us, and you have to come back and join us again.
Please invite me. I do. I got some other folks that can do well too. So let me
right.
know.
Well, you know how you send them my way.
I definitely will.
All right, take care.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you, guys.
Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and taught to have no fear.